Welcome to Cut the Crop, keeping you in the know about everything you grow. Researchers, growers and other interesting folk delivering insights and information on topics ranging from agronomy to profitability. Brought to you by the Foundation for Arable Research.
Hello and welcome to Cut the Crop. I'm Anna Heslop and today my guest is far cereal researcher Jo Drummond. Because it's spring, we're going to be talking about cereal disease management and, more importantly, about the newly released FAR Cereal Disease Management Strategy booklet. So, welcome, Jo.
Thank you, Anna.
Tell us about this publication. This is version 6, I believe.
It is version 6, yes. So every 2 years since about 2012, that strategy has come out, and that strategy sort of encompasses the previous 2 years' worth of trial work. It builds the foundation for our decision making around some of the things that happen in our trials, and it includes any new actives that might be coming to the market or have been recently on the market.
So you talk about the trial. So how do you actually pull all that information together?
It's quite a complicated process, and there are a number of trials across a number of parts of the country. So that's a case of pouring back over the data and looking back at all the reports and pulling out all the really useful nuggets that a farmer can use while they're making their decisions.
So in the book, you're most of your trials, when we look at the tables and results around trial results, you're talking about brand name products. Is that because they're the only ones that work?
No, absolutely not. What we actually use in our trials is the trademarked products, but in the back of the booklet, we also provide a table which gives you an indication of all of the products that are associated with that active ingredient. So for us, it's really important that we talk about active ingredients. So that gives you some flexibility to dial in whichever product you feel is going to fit within your budget and what you're trying to achieve.
So there's no problem when you're reading through the strategy swapping generics in for a trademarked product?
Oh, absolutely not. And you have to think too about where you're doing your biggest amount of fungicide spend around that T2 application, and you'll find that within those types of products, so those Group 7 SDHIs, there aren't generics associated with those products. So it's actually the mixing partners that where you have that flexibility.
Okay, well, that's good to know. So we're basing this book, 2022 strategy, on the last 2 years' research. The last book came out in 2020. What big changes? Have there been any big changes that you've noted in those previous 2 years?
Well, we'll all know what happened last season. For some of us in different parts of the country, particularly in parts of the North Island and Canterbury, we had a really, really challenging season. And what we've seen is some changes in cultivar ratings in that last season, and in a way that we perhaps haven't done previously. So that might change the way we view our cultivars and how some of those cultivars are managed. So that's probably the big thing. In 2020, just after we released the last strategy, there were some newer SDHI products that have come onto the market, and those have now had a bit of time to bed in. So it's a case of making sure that all the products that we're using are still fit for purpose, and also looking at how we manage our cultivars in some of these more challenging times.
So yeah, you're referring to cultivars there. So the book isn't just telling you which chemicals work and which don't.
Oh, absolutely not. And I think the most important thing to think about is that actually we're talking about the crop first. So that's really building that foundation around your selection of a cultivar. And then we make all our decision making from that. So we pull in all our knowledge of when our sowing date, our irrigation management, our stubble management, whether we're wheat or whether we're barley, because that's going to be different depending on what you're growing, and pulling those all together as an integrated package. And that really links in with our cultivar performance trials, and those publications are available in autumn and again in spring, so we can have a look at those and look at what the ratings are telling us, and then we can use that along with our disease pressure and the things that we're seeing right now in the paddock to make that decision for us.
A tricky question and not rehearsed. What would be the best recipe for having the most resilient crop?
Okay, that's a great question, and it's definitely not rehearsed. And what I will say is that's going to depend entirely on where you are in the country. So you've got to pick a cultivar that's going to be best suited for when you sow. Now, ideally, we'd be pushing that sowing date sort of into the middle of April and a little bit later, but not everybody is going to be in that same position. So if you know that you need to sow earlier, really look at those cultivar ratings and try and sow the most resistant variety that you can that fits within your system. We want a cultivar that's got a bit of plasticity in terms of its sowing date window. So you're not going to see yield loss if you swing it early or if you swing it late. But if you go early, just remember you might have to put on a bit more fungicide to compensate for the fact that you're putting a little bit more pressure into that system. So in an ideal world, we'd be picking the most resistant cultivar we can and maybe just holding back and not sowing it super, super early, but just enough to get it in the ground and get us through that sort of autumn period where we're seeing a lot of primary inoculum floating around. And that really does make a big difference, but only for wheat. For barley, we don't have those same tools. So for barley, the best thing that we can do is implement a balanced fungicide program, and that is pretty much the only tool that we have.
So we've worked out that cultivar is important. What are the golden rules around fungicides?
Absolutely. And there are many golden rules around fungicide. So the first and foremost best one that you can possibly do is to mix your mode of action groups. So not relying too much on single mode of actions at a single time. So making sure that and that might be even something like stacking a triazole. So our group 3 fungicides, where we've got 2 different triazoles that have different cross resistance pathways. That's a really good strategy. Or the introduction of a multi-site. That's really, really helpful. And we've only got one for use in our cereals. And in barley, it's really, really useful and really helpful. In wheat, it's a sound resistance management strategy, and then making sure that we're using our products in a protectant way, so not relying on their curative activity and not exceeding the number of doses on the label. So, when you're using an SDHI, a group 7, you're allowed 2 hits, it says so on the can, but if your disease pressure doesn't warrant it, you actually probably are fine with 1. And that's what our data from a number of trials across a number of seasons has shown us pretty clearly.
So every season is different.
Absolutely.
Can you budget for fungicides at the start of your financial year?
Yes and no. I think what we need to think about is that you're going to be putting your big bucks around that flag leaf timing, and we know consistently that is the most important, and that's where you're going to put your Rolls Royce. So making sure that you've got a nice solid mixture, and that's where you can integrate that SDHI, that group 7 chemistry, along with our triazole and potentially our multi-site. So that's really going to be our sort of keystone fungicide timing. Then it's a case of actually looking at the seasonal pressure that you have and making your decisions around those other timings. So again, T1, as this goes to air, some of our crops will have had T1s already, but some will be approaching that depending on your sowing date. So it's a case of looking at what disease pressure you have and choosing the products that are going to fit best for the pressure that you have and the cultivar that you have.
So there's a bit of research and field walking to be done beforehand.
Oh, absolutely. And I think that's probably the best way to do it is actually go out and look at the crop. Have a really good look and see what's happening down the base of the crop, and have a look at the weather forecast when you're doing that planning, because that can give you an idea of if we're going to have a risk period and when any infection might start showing up in our crop.
As we noted earlier, this is the 6th edition of this book. So this work has been going on for a really long time. This fungicide work. And there's 2 kind of focuses to it. One is around protecting your fungicides and trying to stave off resistance. And the second one is obviously about having a jolly good crop that's going to be profitable.
Absolutely.
And those 2 things are also quite key in another research project or a larger umbrella project that you're involved with. Do you want to talk about that for a minute?
Yeah, sure. And the project you're alluding to is A Lighter Touch, and that's looking at agroecological ways of crop protection. And it's a bit of a mouthful, but basically what that means is you keep the crop at that centre of that decision making. And what we're looking at FAR is trying to rationalise out all of those different inputs that we're putting in and making sure that those inputs are actually providing us what we need. And really, when we're talking about a disease management program, we're trying to balance out getting adequate disease control. We're balancing out getting the yield that we need to be getting to make it pay, our profit, and also resistance management. And that's really key. And it's a really hard thing to try and rationalize because it doesn't always have a monetary value. But the minute those chemistries stop working, you know about it. So it's actually balancing out those 4 key things. And that's what that program looks to do. And it might be a case of you might be able to identify on your farm that you don't need a T0 in 1 year. And another season, for another grower, it might be, I have the confidence to use 1 SDHI instead of 2 SDHIs. For one grower, it might be the confidence to reduce back from a full noise leaf layered approach, maybe having a look at those application shoulder timings like a T0 or some of those later applications where if we have late disease pressure, having a look and seeing that those may not be providing them the value that they think they are, maybe just a feel-good factor and not actually a monetary and yield gain from that. And for another grower down the pathway, it might actually be having the confidence to apply an appropriate dose rate or to try a different type of mixture or to integrate other alternatives into their system. It might be a biological seed treatment or to really focus on the crop to make that decision. And I should really point out that just because it says a lighter touch, it doesn't mean do nothing. It means treat appropriately and treat it based on the season.
So there will still be some occasions when going full noise is the most appropriate.
Oh, absolutely. And within that strategy, we've developed a bit of a traffic light approach. So if you're in a place where you're under low disease pressure and you've sown late and you've got a nice resistant cultivar, it's going to look quite different to a person who has, out of necessity, had to sow early and they've got maybe a second wheat that's like a more susceptible cultivar. So those are all things that can be rationalised out. So it's not a one-size-fits-all approach. It's a have a really good look at your crop and make your decisions based on the crop itself.
Thanks for that, Jo. Keep up the good work, and growers, have a great day on the farm.
Thanks for tuning in to Cut the Crop, presented to you by FAR. If you'd like to know more about any of the topics discussed or have any suggestions for future topics, go to www.cutthecrop.co.nz.